So welcome back. So from our previous videos, we've gone through the actual starting of our project, building out our user stories, obviously the requirements planning, and some test data management. So the next thing to do is obviously we're going to develop whatever feature we're working on, and we need to then release it and do our testing. So we're going to do that next. So in this video, we're going to start with our dashboard of our CDD product. So CDD is the Continuous Delivery Director dashboard. On the dashboard, we've got an overview of our environment. Bottom right hand side down here, it shows us how long we're spending in environments. So if I mouse over one of these, we'll see that this is so that is the QA environment. That's the development environment. So we can see that we're spending a lot of time in development and QA, which is good. We should spend very little time in production because that should be all automated. Now within the CDD, what we have is our release. So let's go and look at our releases. So a release within CDD is all of the tasks that need to be completed to complete a deployment. So in our case, what we've done is we've defined each of these columns as environments. So we have dev, QA, UAT, pre-production. If I scroll to the right, we have production. So each of the boxes inside these phases is something we need to do. So obviously in development, when we start our testing, we need to do things like start some infrastructure. We may need to build machines. In our case, we're going to start some Docker containers, which are required to run our Selenium grid. We're going to notify our team that we're starting. So in this case, we're going to send messages through Flowdoc. We can also do things like Slack. Once that's done, you can see they're together, they run together. Once that's complete, we can then move on to phase 2, which is, right, let's generate the test data required for our testing. Now in our example, we actually need to mask data, augment the data with synthetic data, and do find and reserve to identify records for our testing. And we're going to do that all automatically. And we need to deploy a virtual service. So as part of our environment, there's a service we can't have access to. We're going to virtualize it and start that. Once that's all done, we can then do our deployment. So this is actually going to take the code from Jenkins and deploy it to our WebLogic server. Once that's all done, obviously we can test, and that's our testing section here. We're going to then run UI tests, API tests, load tests. If they're all complete, we can then complete the release. Once a phase is completed, we can then promote that to the next environment. So you probably see here these numbers. This number here, B193, that's the Jenkins build number. So we have build 193 in development, we have build 180 in QA, and we have build 177 in UAT. And we'll see these as we promote. Now the other thing within CDD, on the left-hand side here, what this is showing me is the stories from Agile Central associated with the release we're looking at. So the release team can see what the payload is of the release they're working on. We can also run reports to understand where these particular stories are within our release pipeline. Now if I just refresh this panel, what you'll see is in the first video we actually added user story 2 to the release we're working on, and you see now that's now here. So automatically the release team can see what stories are part of this release. Now before we start the deployment, we're just going to show you the application. So here's our application server. So it's like I said, it's a Medrec application. We've got the build number on the home screen. Now we're going to update the application, and also we need to test it. And that test means logging in. We need to come to the screen, click on that login button, enter the login details and the password, obviously. Now here, if I go into this pending request, what we have is lots of patient data. So if I drill into one of these patients here, like Sean, we have his name, his email address, his date of birth, his social security number, all things that we need to protect. So what we're going to do for our testing is we're going to replace all of this patient data with new data. We're going to augment the data we've got by masking it, and then generate new records. And then we'll use that for our testing. So we'll come back to this later. Let me just go back to that screen there. So like I said, we're currently on build 193. So let's start our release. So we're in Jenkins, and Jenkins is going to be our build tool. I'm going to click into the project and just do build now. Now down the bottom here, what you should see in a second is the build number. In fact, we've started before the Jenkins screen's refreshed. If I go to CDD, what we'll see is we've started that release already. So the release has started. We've notified the team that we're starting. We're currently starting our Docker containers. So we're using Docker for this. If I go to my Portainer system, this is the Docker management screen. You can see these containers are stopped. We should have automatically started them by now. We've started them. So our infrastructure is ready. The team know we've started. The next thing we need to do is two things. One is we need to start a virtual service, and the other thing is we need to actually mask, generate, and find test data. So you can see the virtual service is started, and if I go to my service virtualization tool, what we'll see is, if I just move that column out a bit, what you'll see is we've started that virtual service 28 seconds ago. This is the virtual service we created earlier from ARD. If you remember, if you looked at the video number 2, we actually generated a virtual service, and that's the virtual service there. Now we're also generating test data. So if I go to Test Data Manager, we're doing three things. One is we're doing masking. So if I go into data masking, in our jobs, what we should find is up here, that job there, we ran a job to mask. We masked 5 records. It took 4 seconds. So the first thing we did is mask the data that we had. We then actually used our self-service, our synthetic data generation to generate data. So here, if I click on this one, we generated, in this case, 10 records in 4 seconds. So within our environment, we now have that test data masked and also augmented. But also, we actually need the record for our testing. We need to actually give to the UI testing tool a patient details it can use to test to make sure the UI is correctly working with the database. And we do that in our find and reserve. So if I go to my reservations, what you see here is we actually have selected one of those records that we've masked and subsetted and the like, and made it available to our testing tool. So we've reserved it. Now it's Kareem Lefebvre, that's the details, and later on we'll look at this and you'll see the testing tool using this record. Now because we've actually done all that, we should have now moved on. If I go back to CDD, as you can see here, we've actually moved on to the next phase. So we've generated the test data, deployed the virtual service. We're now deploying the update. So if I go back to our WebLogic server, it's currently offline because what we're doing is updating it. And we're updating it with Atomic. So let me come here and show you Atomic. Now this is a very simple deployment, and obviously normally you wouldn't take a server offline, but we're doing this to show you things working. So here, in the flow, we've taken that build from Jenkins, we've gone to our WebLogic server, stopped the app server, undeployed the app. We're now deploying the app. I'm going to start it back up. Let me just refresh this screen, and you'll see that that's currently running. Yep. So we've deployed the app. We're now starting it. If we go back to our UI here, you can now see we've deployed that new app version, and we're now ready to do the test. So as soon as that's finished there, we'll go to the next phase, which is to kick off the testing. So join me in the next video where we'll show you the testing.